Disney, because of their insistency on milking every franchise for what it's worth, they had to go and make my Star Wars Complete Saga Blu-ray set and my Indiana Jones Complete Adventure set incomplete. You might even say these two belong in a museum. Hey everyone, it's Alexander Robinson. Welcome to the channel, and this is my review for Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, which is the fifth and final film in the Indiana Jones series. And given Harrison Ford's age, I actually believe it this time. This is the first movie in the Indiana Jones series to not have any creative involvement from either Steven Spielberg or George Lucas. Both of them are executive producers, and in the director's chair we have James Mangold, the same director that made movies like Copland, Walk the Line, Night and Day, The Wolverine, Logan, 3:10 to Yuma, and Ford v Ferrari. This movie takes place about a decade after the events of Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. Indy is now working at a different university and is retiring. However, his goddaughter, Helena Shaw, played by Phoebe Waller-Bridge, comes back into his life asking him about this mysterious dial that her father, Indy's partner during World War II, was obsessed with. So the two of them end up going on an adventure through unusual circumstances and try to reach this dial before some former members of the Nazi Party get to it first. Clearly, this was one of my most anticipated movies of 2023 because, as you can tell, I'm a massive Indiana Jones fan. I love the first three movies. Raiders is just a masterpiece. It's in my top 20 of favorite movies of all time. Temple of Doom, when I reviewed it 5 years ago, I wasn't the biggest fan of it, but having rewatched it recently, I found myself in love with it. Is it still racist? Yes. Is Willie annoying to the point where she's just a insulting female stereotype? Yes, but there's still so many excellent scenes throughout that movie and so many great memorable moments that I just found myself loving it this next time around. Last Crusade is great as well, but unfortunately it's the Indiana Jones movie that I have watched the least, but I still love it. Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, on the other hand, I don't think is as bad as people make it out to be. It's much like with the Star Wars prequels. At worst, it's just average. It's not, oh my god, this is the worst thing in the world. And it seems like a lot of the harsh criticisms towards that movie are focused around stupid nitpicky stuff like nuking the fridge, the gophers, the swinging on vines. There's just a lot of stupid things in that movie that don't distract from the bigger picture. Of course, I'd always have a desire to watch the original trilogy before Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, but y'all need to chill out about that movie, especially since it's been 15 years since Kingdom of the Crystal Skull came out, and now we have a new Indiana Jones movie that the internet can tear each other apart over, because this got trashed when it was released at Cannes. I don't know what Disney was thinking when it came to releasing this movie at Cannes, even if it was out of context, because this is not a type of movie that the Cannes audience goes for. It's a miracle that they went for Top Gun Maverick last year. And of course, there was a lot of complaining about this movie before it came out, mainly from all the incels that just watch everything Lucasfilm does and say it sucks no matter what, without even having seen the movie. So now that I've seen it, let me first say that I went into this with neutral expectations. Obviously, I'm a big Indiana Jones fan, and I couldn't pass up to wear this outfit again for the review. But having reviewed movies on YouTube for 10 years, I've seen a lot and have learned to tamper my expectations when it comes to a big franchise, especially one that I dearly love, like Indiana Jones. And when the movie starts out, I thought it was actually really cool. It's classic Indiana Jones, quite literally, because you have a de-aged Harrison Ford, which it's off-putting at points, but other times it looks really good. John Williams' score is iconic. It feels like a classic Indiana Jones film. But once the prologue ends and we actually kick off this film, I thought it dragged and went downhill very quickly. There's a lot of negatives that I have against this movie. One of them is that there's nothing all that memorable or actually creative in terms of the action or just memorable scenes altogether. Say what you want about Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, but at least you remember certain moments of that movie. for the wrong reason, but at least you remember them and they stick out to you. Dial of Destiny doesn't have anything like that. The action scenes are good, they're well done, but what this movie really needs is something like the opening from Raiders of the Lost Ark, the minecart chase from Temple of Doom, or the tank sequence from Last Crusade. You don't really get any of that in this movie. If there was anything to remember about some of these action scenes, it would be some of the terrible CGI. Now, I know it's foolish of me to assume that an Indiana Jones movie, especially one produced by Disney, would not utilize CGI. But considering that this movie cost almost $300 million, there's no reason for a lot of the CG sequences to look as bad as they do. I would say they look worse than they do in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. And I don't understand why this movie costs so much, because for those of you that don't know, Raiders of the Lost Ark cost $20 million in 1981, which, adjusted for inflation, is around $66 million, so it doesn't even break the $100 million budget. And that movie was a lesson for Steven Spielberg to not go over budget when you're making your movies, because he went over budget with Jaws and Close Encounters, and both of them were hits, but he went over budget with 1941, and that was a huge flop. So when it came to Raiders of the Lost Ark, Paramount mandated an 85-day shooting schedule, nothing more, and Spielberg, Lucas, and Frank Marshall implemented a self-imposed 73-day shooting schedule to avoid the issues that Spielberg had with his last three movies, even though Jaws and Close Encounters are brilliant. The point is, considering the history of Raiders of the Lost Ark and its budget and shooting schedule, it's baffling that this movie cost as much as it did and doesn't look anywhere near as good as even the movie that came before. Now, story-wise, there's a lot of questionable decisions made throughout, some of which I've kind of learned to appreciate the more I thought about this movie. Others I still can't get on board with. The movie tells us about something that happened in between Kingdom of the Crystal Skull and this film, and it will occasionally be brought up in conversation, and it's supposed to be a big part of Indy's character, especially at his old age, but sometimes the movie will just forget it happened, and when we get to the end, it'll go, oh, never mind, it resolved itself. Speaking of that ending, I won't spoil what happened, but that was the point of the movie where I honestly checked out. It was something that was so absurd, and I had to keep telling myself, the Indiana Jones movies have had absurd moments before. They're usually based around some sort of fantastical thing. And I even let the alien slide in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. It felt out of place and was a true tipping point, but it wasn't enough to ruin the movie for me. This, however, tips it over the edge to the point where I have a really hard time accepting it. I don't know how other people will feel about this moment, but I predict it's going to be a huge point of debate on whether you like this movie or not. And speaking of which, I want to shift gears into the things I did like, because I don't think this is a complete disaster. And considering how quick the internet is to label something as either the best thing ever made or the worst thing ever made, I want to avoid all that. I want to be the guy that looks at the whole big picture, takes in all the bad and the good, but ultimately gives you a rating based on how I feel about the entire package. And in terms of the good stuff, Harrison Ford is still as great as ever. He's 80 years old, but still manages to give a great performance as Indiana Jones. It's clear that he always had a lot more interest and passion towards this character than he did Han Solo, and it shows. Phoebe Waller-Bridge is an actress that I always found to be extremely charming, funny, and full of charisma. And as Helena Shaw, she actually started off as obnoxious. There are some details that happen throughout the movie that just make her character kind of unlikable, and I think it's more due to the writing than Phoebe Waller-Bridge's performance. But as the movie went on, I started to warm up a little more to Helena, and I ended up liking her. Mads Mikkelsen as the film's villain was good, but he's basically another Mads Mikkelsen type villain. I didn't think there was all that much to this character, and honestly thought Cate Blanchett in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull was a more fun and interesting villain. The John Williams score is of course amazing. I don't think I need to really emphasize that any further. It's a John Williams Indiana Jones score. that's all you need to know. However, I do have to say that in line with this movie not being all that memorable, I couldn't hum any of the new themes that John Williams composed for this film. And that's disappointing, because there were some really cool new themes in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull that I liked, like Mutt Williams' theme. That still gets stuck in my head every now and then, even though it doesn't match the music of the original trilogy. And I also really appreciate the fact that this movie doesn't nostalgia bait as much as I feared it would. Because it's a Disney production, it's the latest installment of a classic franchise that's been going around for over 40 years. I was dead certain that there would be a bunch of nods and callbacks that would just be forced and completely inorganic, and the movie doesn't really do that. The only major nostalgia-themed callback that I was aware of was when INDY referenced events from Temple of Doom. And that's about it. And it plays into the character's old age and how he's not as young as he used to be. On the whole, I think the movie is just okay. It's got some really bad moments that still just irk me and that I can't get on board with calling this a good movie. But it does have a lot of really good moments as well. It's just none of them are all that memorable. And I know I might be disappointing a lot of people with this review, because some of you might be disappointed that I didn't like this movie, and some of you might be irritated that I didn't trash this movie as much as you were led to believe based on the reviews that came out of Cannes. And I'm so glad that I have this rating for this particular moment, because Dial of Destiny is a movie that I'd advise you to watch at your own risk. If you're an Indiana Jones fan, you should at the very least see it. And it's not the train wreck that a lot of people are claiming it to be, but it's really not all that memorable. It's way too long. It goes on for 2 hours and 30 minutes plus. There really isn't a reason for any Indiana Jones movie to be longer than, say, 2 hours and 10 minutes. The longest movie before this was Last Crusade at 2 hours and 8 minutes. So you really feel the length with this film, and after a while I just kind of wanted it to end. Especially when we got to the ending of the film, which still I have a hard time grasping. So yeah, this was a major letdown for me. Even with neutral expectations, I walked out feeling disappointed. But I'm not one of those fans that's gonna go, oh, it ruined the other movies, or I can never watch Raiders of the Lost Ark the same way again. No, I can still love those first 3 movies as much as I did back then before this film came out, because there's no reason that a new installment that I don't like should ruin what came before. My enjoyment for that original trilogy and bits of Kingdom of the Crystal Skull are still intact. However, watching this movie made me really understand how important Spielberg and Lucas were to the first 4 movies. Because Indiana Jones is one of those franchises that can't work under anyone else besides the people who've been making these movies since the beginning. And this is no disrespect to James Mangold, who's an amazing director and has proved that he can do franchise films with The Wolverine and Logan. And there are certainly franchises out there that can benefit from having different directors give their own unique takes on them, like Marvel, DC, Godzilla, everything that's not the original prequels in terms of Star Wars. Because of how wide and expansive the Star Wars galaxy is, it's a massive playground for any creative talent to come in and put their own spin on it. The original trilogy and the prequel trilogy, however, are films that only worked because of Lucas's vision. Yes, he didn't direct Empire or Jedi. Yes, the prequels have a lot of problems, but they're still guided by one man's vision. He had a clear direction on where to go. And this also demonstrates how there are franchises out there that can only work due to one or a few creative minds. Like Pirates of the Caribbean, the Lord of the Rings films. Even though the Hobbit movies are not all that good, they're still under Peter Jackson's direction. There's a reason why James Cameron won't let anybody else direct the Avatar films, because if he were to, he'd have to specifically train them to make those movies as good as what he gave us with those 2 films. And Indiana Jones also falls into the same category of franchises that only worked because of a few creatives, Spielberg and Lucas. Let's take a look at the Disney property that they actually created themselves, Pirates of the Caribbean. Why is it that everyone goes back to the first 3 movies, even even with At World's End being not all that good. It's because Gore Verbinski made those movies what they were. And Ted Elliott and Terry Rossio's scripts were very consistent, and they had an understanding of the world they were building. Without one of them, or all of them, the movies just don't work. That's why nobody even thinks about 4 and 5. And the same thing goes for Indiana Jones. As great of a director as James Mangold is, it's clear that this franchise mainly worked because of Spielberg directing and Lucas coming up with the stories. Maybe in a year I'll look back on this with some fresh new eyes and fully determine how I feel, but right now I don't think this is the ending that Indiana Jones deserved. If anything, Last Crusade, where they're riding off into the sunset, was that perfect ending. I'll even say that Kingdom of the Crystal Skull was a good ending because Indiana Jones is made Associate Dean of the university that he's been teaching at for decades. He finally marries Marion. They have a happy ending. So that was a good enough ending as well. But this one here, I just cannot give it my strongest recommendation, and it, as of right now, left a bad taste in my mouth. And there you go, that's my review for Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, and this might actually be the very last time that I wear this Indiana Jones outfit while doing a review. So in a way, that's a bit sad, but also considering that it's summer and it's hot in LA, I cannot wait to shut off the camera and take all this off. But until then, I want to know what you guys think about Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. If you've seen it, what did you think? Whatever the case may be, let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell button to get notifications. You can also follow me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Letterboxd. I'll see you guys in the next video, but until then, have a good day and take care of yourselves.